We can begin by chanting Om together, all as a group in a collective aspiration, 5 times. We have taken up a theme today which is titled Auroville, the Integral Yoga and the Future of Mankind. As we will see, all three are intricately and profoundly related. The future of mankind itself can be understood only in terms of its development so far over the last millions, billions of years. And taking a vast sweep of time and space, we find that there is only one constant. Many species have appeared and disappeared. The dinosaurs are gone. Many others which do not even know have existed for millions or billions of years and have vanished. But through all those changes, there is one constant. And the constant is not a form, but of a profound impulse in nature, which we can describe as evolution. That's the only thing which we can find consistent across billions of years. Even before life appeared, there was evolution of matter itself. As you're aware, scientists say that the universe began after the Big Bang as only hydrogen gas. Out of hydrogen gas, bit by bit, by a constant intense compression in the heart of the sun, all the other elements of matter have evolved. So there is an evolution even in dead matter. And then out of that somehow life has emerged. And then life has evolved into varieties of form, complexity. And out of that somehow the human mind emerged. We do not know how exactly these transitions have taken place, but they have taken place, and that is clear. And we notice in this entire evolutionary movement something quite peculiar. First, that evolution has a single direction. It's not like walking around in the garden where you can go to one tree, go back to another and wander around randomly. In evolution, it is not a random movement. Every species grows from lesser complexity to greater complexity. Some of them seem to stop at some point, but they do not revert. The crocodile, for example, is as old as the dinosaur. While the dinosaur was wiped out and the human beings came much later and evolved to develop mind, the crocodiles are supposed to have remained pretty much what they were then. But they have not de-evolved. There is a directedness to evolution, and we can't explain it. We can't explain it purely in terms of Darwinian evolution, random mutation, or survival of the fittest. We find also that in the development of complexity, sometimes there are stages which are utterly useless. And while we could still dismiss them as random mutation, we find a chain of useless mutations which suddenly lead to something very useful. For example, the formation of the eye. The eye itself appears after going through 13 different steps, all of which are utterly useless. And after the 13th step is complete, suddenly there is a working eye. There is a gradual change of form, and yet there seems to be a directedness and a purpose in the evolution of that form, which we can't explain by random mutation. At the end of the day, as we study the processes of evolution, we are compelled to recognize that there seems to be some intention, however subconscious, however veiled, something which wants to become, maybe it doesn't know how to become, but the urge itself is directed. And this direction is what has brought us to where we are as human beings today. Where we will go from here, the future of humanity, is dependent on what it is that this deep impulse seeks. Where is this impulse located? In matter, it appears to be something almost automatic, so automatic and repetitive that we can even call it a law of physics. But in life, it acquires a different character. It's still there as an impulse, but no more bound into a law, but more like a habit or a desire. So there is in the single cell, we don't know how it formed, but after it formed, there is a certain urge. An urge, first of all, to survive, to protect itself from destruction, and then an urge to reach out and absorb the rest of the universe into itself. And perhaps it is that urge which in the animal or in the human, in us, we can describe as desire. An urge to reach out and absorb everything that's out there, everything that's useful at least, or that's beautiful, or that's attractive. And there is still the same instinct as in the single cell to protect myself. But in the mind, in the human being, is also the same urge taking a different form, quite distinct from desire, and it is the urge to know. The urge to become something more than what I am. The urge to conquer universe, conquer nature, and perhaps take it one step beyond what nature herself has done. So, I want to study how the plant grows, I want to study the properties of matter and apply that knowledge to improving the processes of nature. These multiple urges embedded in us point out vaguely the direction that evolution is taking us. Because ultimately, when you observe where we are going, the direction is set by this deepest urge. There is nothing else which sets the direction of our evolution. This deepest urge is inborn. The child newborn, hardly a few seconds old, just out of the womb, when it hears the voice of its parents, it turns to look in that direction. What is it seeking? It's this urge within it to want to know the source of the sound, which it has heard while in the womb. Now it wants to see it. And when an object is given in its hand, it wants to grab it. The instinct, you put your finger and the child's hand closes. It wants to catch. And then as it grows older, it wants to bite, smell, taste, break. And as it can think, it wants to question. So this deep-rooted urge in us is in fact the driving force of our entire growth in life. This urge takes various colorings, different kinds of emphasis in each one of us. For some of us, it takes the form of, I want to know. For others, it takes the form of, I want to conquer, I want to master, I want to lead, I want to achieve. For some, it takes the form of, I want to arrange things to make them more beautiful, make them more useful, more perfect. For others, I want to be of help. But there are broadly 4 different colors of expression. The urge itself is common to all of us. When we understand the deepest source of this urge and what it is seeking unconsciously or consciously, then we can know in which direction human evolution is growing. Here, the big picture at least shows us something very interesting. There is, in the early stages of human existence, an individuality fragmented. We all shrink from the universe for our survival, fight to conquer for our personal benefit. But after a while, there is an instinct which says, okay, two of us have a common enemy. Let's fight him together. If there is this giant tiger that's coming to fight to kill me, well, let's all group together because alone we can't fight him. So an instinct of the herd forms for self-protection and creates a kind of a coagulation of a small unit. And as that develops, the unit fights against other units for its survival. And then as that develops, gradually larger units form. And aggregates of family, aggregates of tribe, aggregates of community, nationality or culture. There is a progressive evolution towards a larger and larger collective unity. And here comes a big problem. And the problem for us is this. There is obviously an urge to unite in group life because we need it. But there's also an urge for me to do what I want as opposed to the group needs. And Sri Aurobindo points out that in evolution, both of these impulses exist. The impulse for individual fulfillment and the impulse for the collective fulfillment. And the two are interdependent, so you cannot isolate them anymore. What I find in my life, in anyone's life, what we find in Auroville, is that I cannot actualize myself entirely. I cannot develop myself fully. I cannot fulfill my highest ideals unless I have the support of others. If nothing else, in order for me to have more time, I must be able to have someone's help to prepare my food to free up my time. I can't be growing my own wheat, cleaning it, polishing it, and then cooking it. I won't have time to actualize my artistic impulses. So there is automatically a need for mutual support in collectivity. More than that, in order to develop my faculties, in order to develop my artistic ability itself, I need the interaction of others, someone to appreciate, someone to share with. So the perfection of the individual aspiration needs the collective support. But the collective development also, if the collective consciousness is to grow, we as a tribe or a community or a nation, if we are to grow to our actualization as a nation, as a culture, we need our individuals to grow. And if the individual says, look, for a while at least, keep me out of your demands, then the nation should be able to say, all right, but develop and then get back to me, help me grow. So the collectivity needs the individual for its growth, the individual needs the collectivity for its growth, and yet their demands are almost contradictory to each other. Observe what happens. The moment there is a need for collective life, say we all share at least the need for food. So we assign the task of preparing food to 3 or 4 people. 3 will grow the food, 2 will prepare it, and 1 may serve it, so that the others can have more free time. What happens now? One of the 3 has fallen ill. So we have to create an arrangement where if someone falls ill, someone else is taken into the group. And then somebody has to go for a holiday. He's tired of the work he's done for too long. So we need to make an arrangement. Whenever he goes on holiday, he must inform X. Someone else will be taken as a replacement. Who will be taken? So we have to create another machinery, another system, another law, another regulation. Eventually, to sustain just that simple activity, you have to create an entire administrative or organizational machinery. And that machinery is designed to ensure that the food comes every day on time. Otherwise, suddenly it rained, we all go for food, and Solar Kitchen says, well, X didn't come because it was raining, Y didn't come because he overslept, and Z is on holiday. So no food. That's not acceptable to collective life. So collective life begins to regulate the lives of its individuals in order to sustain itself. Without that regulation, there can be no sustained collective life. But the moment the regulation is started, the individual begins to suffocate. Like the man who has worked in the kitchen every day for the last 10 years without a break says, now I think I need to change my work because I have grown as much as I could, I need a different line of growth. At some point, that pressure, that compulsion suffocates the free need of the individual. Understand the need of the individual itself. Each one of us is not a single color. We are a rainbow, a white light full of all colors. And each color demands its actualization, its need at different stages of life. Look at your own life. As a teenager, what was your interest? What was your ideal? What did you think you would do in life? And what did you end up doing within 5 years of that? And how did you change 10 years after that? Why did you change? Because that need was fulfilled within 2 or 3 years. And another need came up, another side, another aspect of your personality. And there's so many facets which demand successively their fulfillment. And then, the moment there is a single imposition, something is constrained. Our deepest need is also to be free. Unless we have the freedom to experiment with our own capacities, even the freedom to make mistakes, we will not really grow. And so the instinct of freedom pushes against any imposition. If, for example, we create a structure for sustenance of food, eventually the pressure of that structure begins to suffocate. And there's a reaction, a revolt. And for some reason, this person who used to smile the first 2 years of serving food now is a little grouchy, irritable. Each time you go late, he says, well, why are you late? I can't wait for so long. And we don't understand why. And he doesn't understand why. And the moment that compulsion is lifted, the spirit breathes freely. When the compulsion is sustained long enough, it revolts, rebels, and breaks the system which is imposing itself. So you can see how the needs of the individual and the collective are almost opposite to each other. The moment the individual comes forward, and let's say everybody revolts into freedom, the system breaks. The moment the system becomes strong, the individual breaks because the freedom goes. How do we resolve this dual need that is deep-rooted within all of us? This is the crux of the problem of human evolution today. Because something very important has happened in the last 100 years, which is not so at least for the last 10,000 years, as far as our records show of history. For the last 10,000 years, you find these small groups living pretty much in isolation. If you wanted to travel from Paris to Chennai, well, it used to take 2 or 3 years. If you went by land, it would take 6 months to 9 months if you went by sea. And so, such long distance travels were few and far. A few people traveled, they brought back a rich experience, shared it with others, but largely humanity was isolated into small pockets. But in the last 100 years, humanity has been brought together into one big family, whether we like it or not. And here, this demand of collective life and individual life is brought head-on into conflict. Not only that, there is a complexity of collective needs. There is, for example, in your home, the need of your family. There is the need of the community in which you live. There is the need of Auroville itself. There is the need of the state of Tamil Nadu, which also interferes in Auroville's affairs. There is the need of the nation of India. There is the need of the Asian region. There is the need of the world. Each of these collective identities has its own demand, whether it is economic, political, social, cultural, or otherwise. And there is a conflict between these needs of groups also. We are entering into a state of increasing complexity of human life where there is no clear solution. All the solutions so far which humanity has tried to bring in, whether it was a solution of compulsion of state or some complex organization, eventually they break. And let's understand why. Most of these solutions are created by our understanding of things. We understand that this is what's required, we need food at this time. So, the mind logically creates a chain of cause and effect and says, put these in place, the food will come on time. Which rationally is absolutely fine. But it ignores one fact, that the persons involved are not only rational creatures, but they are also emotional creatures. And the emotions are what rebel. There is a clear conflict between two parts of consciousness. We can in fact sit down and think out how best to organize human unity and create a framework so beautiful and perfect in thought that you'll say, wow, it should work. The moment you actualize it, give that thought a form and bring into precise structure some arrangement, you will find one person, one community, or one situation to which it is detrimental. Eventually, therefore, any expressed system will fail under specific situations. What happens is, the impulse of life within us and its expression through emotions, the vital nature, always seeks complexity, richness of expression, variety. It hates monotony. Mind is imposing a monotonous rule, and so the two are fundamentally incompatible. Mind is very happy operating with the laws of physics and matter because matter is rigid like the mind, structured logically. Life force is not. It's the very opposite. Therefore, one can conclude that any imposed system will fail by definition. Any imposed, any created system of mind will find a situation of contradiction, internal self-contradiction, and therefore will fail. Now, when we come to such a conclusion, where then does humanity go? With this increasing complexity and conflict of different needs, where will we go? Will we enter into increasing chaos? Very likely. And that's a strong trend. Or, in order to control chaos and to protect lifestyles and national identities, there will be a violent imposition of the state demand on the individual, compelling the individual, even teaching the individual how to think according to its needs. And you see this happening all over the world. Whether it is in religious schools which are imposing a religious framework for its sustenance, or whether it is political system which are imposing themselves on individuals to sustain, perpetuate themselves. Everywhere in the world you find an imposition increasing, hardening. And in sharp reaction to that, the anarchic tendencies pushing up from below, demanding freedom. In fact, Sri Aurobindo observes there are two extreme forms that this has taken place in human life in the last 100 years. The socialist system and the capitalist system. Socialism has tried to bring forward the truth of collective living. And in order to make that collective life perfect, it had to suppress individual freedom. Capitalist system tried to bring forward the truth of individual freedom. It's a free-for-all, do pretty much what you like. But because people began to misuse the freedom, gradually it brings in systems, structures, limiting the freedom. Including now, you cannot travel on a plane with a soft drink in your hand, but it's meant for the good, for the protection of all. You see how it works, bit by bit. For the good, it must constrain the freedom. But more important, though it started with freedom, it had to suppress or lose equality of status of the collective life. There has been an extreme fragmentation of society, wherever capitalism has been let loose in its freedom, to such a point that even the need of collectivity in families is breaking. The result, some shocking statistics that we find in life in the USA, for example, that every second marriage ends in divorce. It can't survive. Every second American has visited a psychiatrist or regularly visits a psychiatrist. For what? Because he is lonely. Because he misses something. There's some dissatisfaction. Which in family life, he would have gone to his grandma, put his head on her lap and said, I'm so unhappy, I'm so troubled. And grandma pats you and says, don't worry, things will be well. Psychiatrist says the same thing and takes $100 for that. But the extreme fragmentation in the name of individual freedom has broken the forms of collective life, and there's a reaction taking place which says, no, this is not the way to go. And again an attempt to bring back family values, community values, and often many communities spontaneously sprouting in different areas. But still, the moment you try to form the community, the same problem resumes. How will we organize the community that it will sustain and yet not stifle individual freedom? At the end of the day, the problem remains. Even after the Soviet Union broke apart in revolt from within because of suffocation of freedom, the freedom that came up was anarchic. It is more the rule of the mafia today than of the organized government. You have the same problem again. Because both of these attempts miss a third component that Sri Aurobindo now brings forward. He says there's a third element necessary without which you cannot have individual and collective growth together. You cannot have freedom and equality together. And what is the third element? A certain sense of mutuality, a certain fraternity, a commonality, a deeper thing that unites us in freedom. Without that, individual, collective cannot unite into each other. And this has been missing in both the socialist and the capitalist experiment. It is this principle which will give you the key to the future of humanity. Otherwise, humanity will break apart and go through repeated cycles. Perhaps we can say that this third element will eventually emerge as people learn their lesson after regular cycles of individualizing and collectivizing and individualizing and collectivizing through much pain, maybe in 1,000 years. Perhaps. It's very likely. But it's also possible that within those 1,000 years we may destroy ourselves entirely. And so, this whole process of evolution that could have happened over the next 2,000-3,000 years, but might just as equally fail and collapse, that whole process of potential development, the mother has short-circuited by creating Auroville. By creating Auroville. In Auroville, this challenge has been brought together. Individual needs, collective life, a practical working human unity on the basis of this third principle, a deeper mutuality, commonness. If it works here, it can work everywhere. And this experiment of Auroville could not have been done by bringing a few people and saying, hey, you guys are most likely to be able to do it, let's solve the problem. Because tomorrow, when the same solution is attempted to be applied in a different circumstance, it would fail there. And therefore, it was necessary for Auroville's objectives and its success as a precursor for world unity and its solution to bring every possible culture, every representative of human type, every nationality including, and bring them together on this new foundation. Because without this new foundation, Auroville also will fail. So the condition for joining Auroville, the mother wrote somewhere, conditions for living in Auroville. From the psychological point of view, the required conditions are to be convinced of the essential unity of mankind and to have the will to collaborate for the material realization of that unity. 2, to have the will to collaborate in all that furthers future realizations. The material conditions will be worked out as the realization proceeds. Now you've given a psychological condition. You must be convinced that there is already an essential unity of mankind. If you start by saying, we are all totally different, there's nothing common in us, well, you can forget even the attempt to unity. We must be able to say, yes, I realize there is something common. Maybe I don't know it yet, but I can sense it. And on that basis, I'm willing to work to actualize that deeper sense of oneness. And this is the only process by which the two contradictions of individual and collective life can be brought together and human unity established in its truest progressive sense. Now you will find the mother is very careful in her formulations When she describes Auroville, she says, Auroville wants to be a universal town where men and women of all countries are able to live in peace and progressive harmony, above all creeds, all politics, and all nationalities. So straight away you have transcended the apparent forms of division. You want to live in peace and harmony, but it's also possible to live in peace and harmony that is imposed, crushing individual freedom. So that's why she says peace and progressive harmony. It's not a static harmony we seek, but one where everything grows, individual and collective. So it's very carefully chosen. Just that one word, progressive, changes the whole objective and the scheme of Auroville's fulfillment. Auroville, at last a place where one will be able to think only of the future. So the entire turn is towards where are we going? What is meant to happen 10,000 years from now? Can we actually actualize it now in our lifetimes? So our goal is not to look back at the past, except to the extent that it's relevant for the present, learn from the lessons, draw from the best achievements, but we want to go there and actualize that here, not wait for it after 10,000 years. So the whole turn being forward-looking. Let's grapple with the core of this problem. What is that common thing on which this living human unity, progressive harmony and peace can be expressed and organized here in Auroville and gradually therefore in the world? There's a very interesting way of looking at the whole problem of unity. And I'll step back from the earlier chain of discussion and we'll relink to it later. Let's look at the problem of unity. When we say that we seek unity, think about it. Aren't we already in some way already part of a larger unity? The food you eat comes from nature. And what the body throws out as its waste matter goes back into nature. Your body itself, therefore, is made of the food drawn from the universe, flowing into this form and flowing out. In other words, my body is part of the continuity of the material world. It's just like a knot drawn up from the continuity of matter. Feeling itself separate, but not actually separate. At every step, I need to drink water. I need to eat food, otherwise it won't survive. It needs resources, it needs clothes. It's always taking from the universe and then giving back. It's only a knot, a whirl, like a whirling typhoon, a cyclone. It has a form. A tornado has a clear shape. It looks like a projection that seems to be fixed, but it's never fixed. It's sucking in air from around, which enters the whirl and is thrown out of the whirl again. Takes up and throws out, takes up and throws out. The only constant is the whirl itself. Our body is pretty much the same. They say every 7 years, every single atom of the body is replaced. So where is my separateness? It's an illusion. I only feel or think I am separate. There's already a unity of the body with the rest of the universe. And the same principle works on the level of my life energies. Where does your energy come from? Through the food you eat, through the energy you draw from the cosmos, either indirectly through food or directly. And where does it go after it's used up? Back into the cosmos. You suck in freshness, you spew out the tired energies. How is the energy within you different from the rest of the cosmos? No fundamental difference. Again, it's a flowing in into a knot, whirling and then flowing out. In other words, at the level of life force also, there is pretty much a unity already with the rest of the universe. And the same with our thoughts. Most of our thoughts pop in, rise up. Where do they come from? 99% we are told by the yogic insight, it's coming from the universe. And where does it all go? We throw it out into action, throw it out through thought, whatever. My mind and mental substance itself is a narrow projection of a vaster mental substance. I'm already united with the universe on all three levels. So why is collective unity so difficult? And here we come to a profound insight that there is something deep within us which is unique. We call it the psychic or the soul. A unique expression of consciousness that inhabits this form, gives it a unique stamp. And it is that which is the deeper cause of my sense of I exist separate from the universe. That experience of I as a separate being, separate awareness, is a distant reflection of that uniqueness deep within me. And it is in the very deepest urge of evolution to actualize that uniqueness in every single form. That's why you see in evolution, no two objects are the same. Obviously, no species are the same, no genus are the same, but even within a particular type, no two pieces, no two creatures are the same. Draw any two horses from the world, from human history. You will not find two which are the same. Draw any two human beings together, you won't find two which are same. Well, look at any two pieces of rock, pebble. No two pebbles are the same. Look at every wave on the sea. No two waves are same. Look at every bubble of every wave. None of them is ever the same. Each is unique. It's as if in evolution there's an urge to express the full diversity of possibilities. And so within us equally there's that urge for uniqueness. Starting from the uniqueness of my truest, deepest identity in the psychic. And this is why we find that it's so difficult to compel unity by external means. The moment you impose a structure or a system of thought, of emotion, or material organization, something deep inside rebels because it does not want to be bound by a system. Because this is the deepest spiritual truth, to be unique. Therefore, no external partial compromise of organization will satisfy. Now you can see, again we have come back to the original question of individual growth. You see it from a different light. You cannot impose anywhere on the individual growth any partial compromise. Eventually this will rebel, however long it takes. But what is interesting is this unique core within us is also essentially the common core in all of us. It is the same divine which exists in each form, though uniquely. The self of each is the same one, because it is one origin from which all of us flow. And here comes then the secret of harmonizing both the collective and individual life. There is only one point of awareness deep within us, our source, which is both one with all things and unique from all things. And therefore, if a collective organization is based on that, then it can accept spontaneously the freedom of each individual and yet hold it together in a larger oneness. Because we are one. The same principle takes place, though in a diluted form and therefore cannot sustain, in a family. Because we feel ourselves one on some level. You are my child. You are my father or mother. And there's a sense of identity on some level, though emotional. On which basis, I don't think too much about giving you what I own. See what happens in a family. Automatically, someone's fallen ill, another takes his place. You don't have to set a rule. You don't have to have a contract binding us. We flow spontaneously according to our need because we feel a sense of oneness. Or, notice how I possess something which is very precious to me. And it's the most precious thing given to me by my great-grandmother or whatever. It's the most valuable thing. And then, what do you do with it? When I know that, well, it's time, I'm old enough, who do I give it to? I give it to the most precious identity I have with another, generally a family member. Here, you keep it. It came from my great-grandmother, now you keep it. I'm happy to give because it's like giving to myself. There's a sense of identity in which, even as I give, I don't feel I've lost. And here is the key. The family still breaks because it is an emotional bond. You still have quarrels because it is an emotional bond. But when that foundation can be shifted deeper in, and we have a sense of oneness at the level of our deepest identity, in the spiritual consciousness, in the psychic being, the self, in that I feel a sense of oneness with every body, as if each body in the world is another of my own bodies. And therefore, when I gift something to you, I have not lost anything. It's just gone from my one hand to another, from my one body to another body. And therefore, the moment there is a need that arises in the collectivity, well, spontaneously someone flows to take that place. I don't feel I'm doing anybody a favor because I'm actually meeting myself. I'm helping myself. And it may sound selfish when you say it in these words, but you see, it's not selfish at all. It's in fact so selfless, everything I have I can give to anybody freely. The whole meaning of selfishness and selflessness dissolve into each other. This very interesting aphorism Sri Aurobindo makes. I don't remember exactly how he forms it, but it goes something like this, that if to be obsessed with oneself is selfishness, then God is the most selfish being, because he's always obsessed with himself. There's no one other than him. When he looks at the world, it's his own body. When he looks at any creature, it's himself manifested. He's so selfish. But that's how we become. In that identity with our deepest truth or our deepest identity, we are the most selfish and selfless at the same time. The two become separate when we live still identified with our outer I sense, which is a reflection of that. So there you can experience selfishness and selflessness as contradictory experiences. Now here, any human unity, the future of humanity itself, rests on humanity being able to establish itself on this deeper base. Auroville, therefore, must be founded on this. Otherwise it won't work. So, Mother says, in the very charter of Auroville, she starts with, Auroville belongs to nobody in particular, Auroville belongs to humanity as a whole. And straight away you see this idea reflected. It's not mine. And yet it's mine in the wholeness of me. Therefore, the very sense of belonging of Auroville is not to the fragmentation of ego, but to the unity of our deepest truth. And then it belongs to us. It belongs to me. In all our forms, in all our bodies. But to live in Auroville, one must be the willing servitor of the divine consciousness. And here's a very interesting result. The divine consciousness is within you. That's you truly in your deepest sense. And you now, as the surface ego sense, must consciously serve it. Otherwise, there is no sense of unity. The unity won't last. So, there is automatically this movement of serving the divine, either as the truth within me, or as the truth above or around that unites us in that deeper oneness, to serve that deepest oneness. Automatically it implies the abolition or dissolution of the ego, however gradually. Also it means in service to the divine, I give myself. I give all that I am. The second step of the charter is, Auroville will be the place of an unending education, of constant progress and a youth that never ages. And here comes automatically this forward movement of growth and change, based on that consecration, service to the deepest truth within, to the divine consciousness. And here you find already the unity of individual and collective life, constant progress unendingly in absolute freedom. So far so good at the level of understanding and thought. Now comes the problem when you translate it into action. So let's all unite in our psychic, in our self. Hang on, it'll take me another 3-4 years at least to find my psychic. Or what is this psychic or self? I can't find it. What do I do? Will I remain in conflict while I still find my psychic? So there have to be steps. Not only that, after all the psychic and self-finding, who will look after the food? We still come back to the original problems. Though we have a starting point. But how do we implement it? And here Sri Aurobindo gives us a solution. He says, increasingly as one turns towards this deeper truth, and it can be progressive, but increasingly as we turn towards it, we recognize or automatically align ourselves with each other on a different foundation. No more is it the basis of, will you fight with me against X? passes out into the past. It's no more on the basis of the egoistic individual survival instincts, but on this deeper principle to which we are aligned. Will you help me actualize this possibility? Yes, that also brings us together. And in that, there is a natural affinity of types of nature. There is a natural affinity arising from the common ideals and interests. And there is a coagulation that takes place in freedom. And see how different this is from the imposed idea. Nobody is there telling you, you three should get together and make the food. There are actually people who will come up and say, I love to cook. Can I please join the kitchen? And there will be several such people. And they will do what they do in freedom, in choice, in joy. They will work together also because on the basis of that commonality. Yes, it's a partial commonality. It's based on an external interest still. The fact that they're aligned to the common goal helps something of that spiritual consciousness to use this outer form as a face, a mask, a framework through which to express itself. And so as we work together to prepare the food, before we prepare the food, we remind ourselves of why we are here. We align ourselves to that deeper aspiration. Maybe we sit in concentration for a few seconds and then we start preparing the food. And in that we have brought forward the vibration of that spiritual consciousness. It uses the form, the mask of the outer arrangement to express itself. And here comes another key. Any form in life can therefore be taken up in this way, in a free natural grouping of self-expression. Any of the things we have criticized of interests, mutual interests, can become a base for that deeper thing to express itself through. And therefore nothing in life need be rejected. All aspects of life are taken up into that. So, the third element of the charter comes. Auroville wants to be the bridge between the past and the future. Taking advantage of all discoveries from within, from without and from within, Auroville will boldly spring towards future realizations. We take up everything that life has offered us as an experience and vivify it with the breath of the Spirit, of this deeper unity that already exists within us. And then it has a new meaning. Sometimes, as we proceed, a form becomes hardened. It begins to become rigid. It begins to suffocate. And eventually, it cracks from this pressure. The pressure to be free. And it cracks because it had hardened, it had lost the vivifying spirit. And we don't mind breaking it because we were never bound to the form. We create new forms or we allow new forms to emerge. As long as they are supported by that spirit within. And so, another characteristic of Auroville is discovered that nothing is fixed. Nothing is static. There's no arrangement that we can say, now we have done it. Nothing is ever done. Nothing is ever finished. Everything is continuously progressing, continuously changing, meeting at each step the reflection of the collective consciousness, the state of the collective evolution. And yet, even as all these forms may change, one thing is constant. The base on which we are here. The goal to which we are growing. The foundation on which this whole experiment is based. That is constant. It changes only in the form of its expression. Rather, it takes up forms, uses them to manifest itself more and more progressively. In a sense, one can say the success of Auroville will be measured by the extent to which this deeper unity already present within can actualize itself in the forms of life of Auroville. That's how we will measure the success. That's how we will measure the growth. Has that taken place in the last 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 2 years? And then you judge for yourself. Has it taken place within your individual life, in your immediate collective life? And you judge for yourself. To the extent that it has taken place, the ideal that Auroville represents is more and more actualized. Now this brings us to the core of this effort itself. how can we actively, consciously actualize it? And it is this process of actualizing this deeper truth which has been traditionally called yoga. The systems of yoga represent various specialized means by which this deeper truth has been actualized. Or let's look at the whole problem from several angles. Actualize your deepest truth, your deepest aspiration, what you have been seeking when the baby was born, and which is now conscious in yourself as a thought, as an ideal, and actualization of oneself. That's one way of looking at it. Or look at it another way. Where are you going to? What you are seeking as a goal, as an end result, the direction to which you're growing, to actualize that, actualize the future into the present. Which is still the same thing, because the goal is precisely that which is deep within you, not yet fully manifested, seeking manifestation. But there are two ways of looking at it, and depending on whether your consciousness is more extroverted or introverted, you prefer looking at it that way or this. Doesn't matter. But we will take it that the two are identical. So, how do we actualize that which is within us? How do we manifest the goal that we seek? How do we unite ourselves with our truth, with the divine? So the word yoga itself means to unite. Unite the individual with the divine consciousness, unite the outer with the inner, the lower with the higher, and they all mean the same thing effectively. Each is a different starting point of experience or effort, but the end result eventually represents the same thing. Unless we can actively, consciously support this process, the actualization of the Auroville ideal will be necessarily slow and painful. It is certain what Auroville represents is already achieved in a certain sense on a spiritual level. And so the goal is certain. But how fast will it be? How easily will it be? That depends on our conscious participation. So someone asked Mother, after the supramental has descended, has manifested, they said, Mother, you had promised that everything will be done now. Where's the change? The trees are still the same, the weather is still the same, I am still the same. So Mother said, wait another 1,000 years and then you'll see. They asked, where is the new species? She said, wait another 1,000 years. In evolutionary terms, 1,000 years is extremely short. It takes millions of years for some new limb to evolve. Here is something dramatic, a new species appearing within 1,000 years. It's very short. And it will happen. The point is, we have a choice of participating in the process. It will take 1,000 years if we do nothing. And it will be a painful 1,000 years. Because evolution, life itself, will hammer away at all the resistance within us. But the moment we consciously open and dissolve those barriers, even remove consciously the ossified forms and bring forward new forms, or vivify the ossified forms with the deeper truth, well, it's a rapid change because you're malleable, you're plastic to the evolutionary need. So 1,000 years painfully, or something much less. We can't speak in terms of time. It can be 1 year, it can be 20 years, it can be 100 years, doesn't matter. Whatever it is we realize, rapidly, joyously. That's the only difference. The choice of conscious participation joyously. That opportunity she has created in forming Auroville. Short-circuiting the many thousands of years of human painful evolution, here with a few aligned to the ideal. That's why we are here. So let's go back to our motivation in coming to Auroville. Why did we come here? What is it that drew us? Something of the ideal it represents? Something of the atmosphere that is established here? Or something I can't give form to, maybe I can't describe it, but something deep inside that resonates with the truth of Auroville. Doesn't matter what. Link yourself to that. Link yourself to that every day, consciously. Because there is the key of your own conscious evolution. Yoga. The various systems of yoga we discover are specialized paths which have evolved, which have been developed over time. Sri Aurobindo presents to us a vast, comprehensive perspective in which all these specialized paths are seen as complementary in a vaster, more natural, spontaneous movement of conscious evolution. Now, if we are to practice consciously this growth, we have been taught it's difficult. Yoga is very, very, very difficult. You know, people who have gone into the Himalayas and spent 20 years, 30 years in intense meditation. Hey, I can't do that. I can't sit for intense concentration, even 5 minutes. How do you expect me to do the yoga? No, I'm not going to try it. Let it happen, whatever happens. And we stop trying. But this comes from a wrong understanding of yoga. So let me present what it is that the integral yoga means and the broad starting point of its practice and how difficult it is. This difficulty or painful process of the yoga is experienced in certain systems because the very systems start with rejecting so many parts of human nature. So, for example, a certain yogic system says, well, you must get rid of desire. You must get rid of the body's grossness, its denseness, its rigidity, its inability to change. You must disconnect from the body. And so you have to concentrate on something inside intensely until your body itself is allowed to shrivel away. That's painful, that's hard, that's difficult. The integral yoga is very different. Its starting point is that we accept our nature as it is, as a starting point. We accept everything that we are to begin with, and then take it up step by step, progressively transmute it to what? Not to something alien, to its deepest truth. So if there is a desire within me, what does the desire represent? And I can look at it 2 or 3 different ways. One of the things it represents is, I want to conquer the whole world, I want it to belong to me. That's what desire wants. It's not satisfied with something which, I got this flower. But the moment I've got it, I want the next flower. And then the whole garden. I want the whole of Auroville's gardens. I want all of the world's gardens. It wants the world. So, how will you get the world? Not by conquering it with the sword or with money, but by discovering that consciousness within you which is one with the whole world. And then you experience all the gardens of the world within yourself. That's how you'll fulfill your desire. But you will fulfill it, but by a different process. So when you take up all the parts of your being and seek to fulfill them, to fulfill their deepest truth and aspiration, what can be easier than that? The part itself, which was otherwise revolting, now participates in the yoga. This is a fundamental difference in between the integral yoga and the specialized systems of yoga. Because we accept all the parts of our being and their deepest truth, there need be no resistance. Of course, at first there will be a resistance until the part is convinced that it is its own fulfillment that we seek. Look at how the human being is made. Our deepest instinct shrinks from falsehood. You see, from falsehood. When somebody, nowadays such things are quite common in the media, a terrorist or a potential terrorist is arrested and then questioned. How do we know if he's speaking the truth or he's lying? Well, you're wiring up with machines. You measure his breathing, his pulse rate, his perspiration, everything else. And what happens? The moment he lies, the body itself revolts. The breathing increases, becomes shallow, rapid. The pulse rate speeds up. The skin perspires. The body resistance drops. The region below the eyes becomes warm. Everything goes against, everything revolts against falsehood. Now, if this is the reaction of the physical body to falsehood, imagine how profoundly the body wants truth. Look at it the other way now. When we seek truth, the whole body will be drawn into that participation. Not just the body, our thoughts, our emotions, everything. And therefore, when we turn our whole being towards the direction of our deepest truth within, or beyond, ahead, whichever way you look at it, everything within us can be drawn into a joyous participation. And therefore one can say the beginning of the integral yoga can be the most joyous, the most easy movement. It does not demand painful austerities. Quite on the contrary. It does demand something. It demands a conscious taking up of the whole being into that ideal. So that's why I said I started with become conscious of why I became to Auroville. What is that aspiration that drew me? That's the starting point. And then bit by bit align all that I am towards that. How do I do it? Well, I can do it by the work that I do. In the very work that I do, I will commit my efforts, my energies, my successes, my failures to that ideal. I feel it deep within me, I offer it here. I feel it beyond me, calling me, and I offer it there to my future. Or I offer it consciously to the Divine Mother who embodies and represents that ideal. Or I start more naturally. I'm not so much aligned to expression in work. I'm more aligned to devotion. So I devote myself to the relationship in love to that ideal. I dwell on it joyously, lovingly. I call it forth in my emotions, in my thoughts, in my actions. And it suffuses my whole being. I'll narrate here an incident which was revealing for me also. It was a guru of some bhakti cult in Gujarat who I met. And he told me he had been to the ashram and he had learnt a very important lesson there. And I was quite interested to know what does a man who's himself a spiritual leader, what did he learn? So he said, when I went there, I saw everybody working hard, working in their own departments, in their own activities. And I told the person with me, I said, how can you people be doing yoga if you don't do your work as an offering to the Guru? Unless you serve the Guru, there is no growth of consciousness. That's the way of bhakti. So the person, the sadhak in the ashram said, well, have you ever been in love? So the man said, yes. I said, see, when you're in love, the only thing you can see is your beloved. The only thing you can feel is your beloved. All your thoughts and all your emotions dwell on the beloved. So here in the ashram, everybody is in love with the mother. So whatever work we do, we know she is in front of us and we do it for her. I said, yes, that makes sense. Now I understand how the yoga works here. So this is a different movement one can take up, in love with the divine, in love with the ideal that we seek, within, outside, above, around, and offering all that we do and all that we are in that love. Dissolving ourselves in the process in self-giving, because that's the essence of love. Or, there's a third starting point. I am more intellectual in my approach. I want to understand. I want to know. I want to know what that ideal truly is within me. I can feel it vaguely. I want to become more conscious of it. And then I gather all my awareness onto that point of awareness, on that aspiration, and become more and more conscious. In everything I do, I try to understand how is this leading to that ideal. I dwell on that ideal through my thoughts. I visualize it. I concretely align everything I do in thought to that. And the end result is same. As I come closer to the ideal, it awakes a love and devotion. In the work I do, automatically there's an alignment to that ideal. So whichever of these three starting points, through work, through devotion, through knowledge, eventually all three merge into each other in a comprehensive movement. We can start with all of them. The essence of the integral yoga in practice is a conscious aspiration taking up the whole of our being. A conscious rejection of all that is contrary to that aspiration. And a conscious self-surrender to the divine, to the ideal that we seek to realize. It is this triple movement that becomes the essence and the core of the whole psychological process of the integral yoga. Let's study each of these steps. First is the conscious aspiration. The aspiration itself can take a passive form or an active form. One can say, I aspire, or even I surrender, and I have given myself. That's it. Now I will do whatever I am told to do. But in what I do, I get angry, I get irritated, I get disturbed, I react, I act according to my instincts. What was the point? But this is a tendency which happens in all of us. We start with a certain intense aspiration and surrender, but we tend to lose our way by sliding back into the old habit of living. And it's only a habit. So there is a need to consciously remind ourselves, what is it I'm here for? To become conscious not only as an idea but as an emotion, as a devotion. And it is only by this activization of the aspiration that the surrender ceases to be passive. There are many, unfortunately, who take this position, I have surrendered my life to the divine. Now whatever happens, well, it's the divine will. That's not true. The divine will has to act through circumstances. And all that happens is not the divine will. The terrorist bombing is not the divine will. But the divine will can use that event to help speed up progress, to help awaken through the shock it creates, to help awaken humanity. But nevertheless, one can't say it's the divine will. So, one has to consciously align to the divine will and ask ourselves, what is it that is the divine will? What is it that I want to do? So, to live in Auroville, one must be the willing servitor of the divine consciousness. This is the starting point. A conscious aspiration, a conscious surrender that goes with it in service to the divine consciousness. So the aspiration is our starting point, without which the surrender becomes passive. This is the importance of the aspiration and our reminding it. In practice, one can actually set aside a fixed time in which one aligns oneself to that aspiration consciously. Set aside 5 minutes in the morning. After your bath, when you're fresh, sit quietly. If you have a space where you offer prayer, that's an excellent place. A sacred space. If you have no such space, you can even step into the garden if you feel it sacred. Find that space that represents for you sanctity. Gather yourself in concentration. Become conscious of the aspiration. I started by saying the aspiration that brought us to Auroville. But that aspiration has been guiding us throughout our life. When you look back at your childhood, look back through your teenage, look back at something you will find common through all those years where you knew you were different. You sought something which you found others didn't seem to be concerned about. They didn't seem to be interested. Somewhere perhaps you even found that their interests and yours didn't match. Their values missed something essential which you had. It's been there throughout, unconsciously. And here when it found Auroville, it says, yes, this is it. But it's still unconscious. Allow it to become conscious and intensify it. That aspiration is leading towards the divine, which is the one thing that we are truly and to which the whole evolutionary movement is growing. The outer form of human unity or its deeper inner unity, all of them are eventually an expression of the divine unity. It is the divine we seek, and consciously align yourself, turn that aspiration towards the divine. At the end of the day again, if you can spend a few minutes, sit with the same gathering movement, realigning yourself to that aspiration, turning yourself to the divine. When we can set these two reference points at the beginning and at the end of the day, you will find gradually something of the mood of alignment to the ideal, aspiration and surrender will tend to fuse into the rest of the day like a perfume. You will realize each time you connect yourself to that presence within or around you, it changes the quality of your responses. Your thoughts become different, your emotions become different, your behavior becomes different. It brings out the best within you somehow. Even the work that you do is somehow more perfect, more true, more satisfying. And gradually there is an increasing joy as a result of that change, by which you realize that as long as you are connected to that aspiration, everything you do is joyous. And then there are days when everything is grey and dull and meaningless, and you realize you have lost connection with the aspiration. Through series of such experiences, you become conscious of the link between the two. And then you develop that capacity to remain connected consciously, constantly. Mother used to discourage long periods of meditation. She said generally what happens then is you go into a deep state, you come out, you lose everything, you are back to your normal state on the surface. She said it's more useful if you can have frequent short meditations to reconnect yourself to your aspiration or to the divine presence within you. I'll place it differently now. The aspiration itself is the expression of the divine within you. If that was not there, we would not aspire. Sri Aurobindo describes in his writings on education, the human being developed in mind, life and body is only a thinking animal. What makes us human is the psychic presence within, from which the urge to exceed, the aspiration to transcend, to grow towards beauty, harmony, love and joy and perfection. All of these originate from there. And therefore it's the divine within which is aspiring in you, which is also the goal of your aspiration. And all the solutions, all the resolutions of these contradictions you find automatically merging into that. So this is your aspiration, and then a conscious rejection. You realize that every time you lose your temper, it causes some disturbance within. It thins or breaks the contact with the aspiration of the divine presence. And then you find it's not worth it to lose that contact by getting angry. So you withdraw the impulse of anger and find a different way of dealing with the problem. You find that every time you indulge in certain kinds of activities, whether it is petty gossip or whether it is exposure to certain kinds of other activity, you find it clouds that contact with the divine. And if you cannot bring into that activity the conscious divine awareness, you reject it. You reject it. So rejection of all that refuses to change and align to the aspiration, or all that goes contrary to the aspiration. And then gradually, something very interesting happens. The whole of your life begins to orient itself to this one central ideal. As this develops, you will find something very important taking place. Every moment becomes precious because it's taking you one more step forward. There's actually a sense of every day and every moment some small growth, however small. And the beauty of growth is that it's the single most interesting thing in life. Look back at your whole life. What are the moments which were most interesting? What do we mean by interesting? You went to a class, you came out, it was interesting. You went to a lecture, you went to an activity, you went to a meditation, you went for a drama, you went for a movie. You come out interested or bored? What's the difference? It was interesting when you went in as one person, you came out having grown. It was boring when you went in as one person and came out the same person. Eventually we realize that things are interesting when there is growth. Things are boring when there is no growth. Even you go to a party, an exciting party. The first time you go, it's interesting because it was a novel experience and you grew. However coarse may have been the interaction, well, you grew from the novelty. But the second time and third time, I've seen it, been there, done that, what now? I'm bored. No more growth coming from that. There is one thing which gives you constant growth, contact with the divine presence. Because it is the full potential that you seek, waiting to manifest. Every time there's a contact with the divine, you are interested in, doesn't matter what you do. I'm sitting idle at the airport waiting for a flight which is delayed 4 hours. If I'm in conscious contact with the divine presence, I enjoy myself all the 4 hours. Doesn't matter what I did. Whether I read a book, I chatted, or I just sat idle. But the contact goes, bring me 100 interesting games, they're all boring for me. So you see, the contact itself leads to continuous growth in your consciousness and is therefore most interesting. And increasingly, as all the moments of your life are aligned to this central point, you find all life becoming interesting. and a continuous state of growth. This is a very important process. Observe everything you do in the day and try to bring it consciously in alignment with your aspiration and in contact with the divine presence. And finally, the third, self-surrender to the Divine Mother. Now here comes an important insight. What is it that has brought us to this state of awakening in evolution? Look back at your life and you will see something interesting. You went through a series of life-changing experiences. Sometimes crises of an extreme kind, where you felt you wouldn't be able to survive, you wouldn't be able to take it, but somehow at that point, there was some inner support or strength which came forward. You went through the crisis, you came out, and then this inner strength also withdrew. Even as the problem came, the inner strength awoke. As the problem was conquered, it withdrew. And the end result, you had grown immensely. And in fact, when you look back at life, you realize the greatest steps of growth came to through such crises, not because of your effort. And here you realize something very interesting happening. It feels as if our lives are led by some wisdom in life, or now more consciously, an action of the divine grace working through circumstances. And though I was unconscious, I realized looking back that I have been led through zigzags, carefully navigated. I thought I would do this, but at the last moment things changed and I don't know what changed it. There was an irretrievable problem and somehow this happened and I don't know what did it. But I was led through. I was prevented from making blunders. Even you look back and say, I wanted to do that, but somehow I was prevented from doing. And then you look back now, you say, if I had actually done it, I would have gone way off track. Fortunately, divine grace prevented me from doing what I wanted to do, you say. Isn't it? It's as if you're led. But look back now at the big picture we started with, the whole of evolution. What leads that urge in matter, in plants, in animals, in human beings? What guides the urge in the collective consciousness, the individual consciousness, molding, shaping all the forms of species even? Some wisdom. The formation of the eye going through 13 steps is led by some wisdom. The divine grace working through matter, through the subconscious substance, inconscient substance. In us, we are self-aware, we can relate to that grace consciously. It has brought us to where we are, and it can lead us to our fulfillment far more rapidly than we can on our own strength. It knows exactly what's needed for us. It has the power to make it happen. So a conscious self-surrender to the divine grace, to the divine force, the divine Shakti, divine power, is the most rapid process to accelerate your evolution. It's that force which has acted indirectly all this while and so was not as effective. Now when you consciously give yourself, it can act directly and can be tremendously effective. And the result is it can compress 10,000 years of evolution into a single lifetime. It can do what we cannot do because we have limited capacity, limited knowledge, limited power. And this becomes the most powerful aid in the yoga. Conscious self-surrender to the divine Shakti, the divine power, divine force, divine consciousness. She molds us. She shapes us. She rearranges, recasts all that we are on her strength. There's an interesting analogy or a symbolic story from the Greek tradition, the 12 tasks of Hercules. Each of these tasks represents a spiritual conquest. The cutting off of the head of the Hydra, I think, with many heads, represents the multiple-headed ego. But there is one important part, one important conquest, the cleaning of the Aegean stables. This is a huge building with 1,000 horses. And these horses are continuously dropping their excreta. And it smells so bad that anyone who enters the stables to wash it falls unconscious. Now this is a perfect description of the inconscient. It's a closed building, it's closed to the light, full of 1,000 horses representing the 1,000 powers, the fulfillment of all potential in matter. And you enter it, you fall unconscious. It sucks you into its inconscience. And the task given to Hercules is to wash these tables. How do you wash the inconscient? So that's one of the things we have to do in this yoga. We want to transform nature itself. I'll come to that in a while. So Hercules, instead of struggling as others have done, he goes to a nearby river, cuts a stream from the river to the stables, and the river water washes through the stables, cleans them out entirely. This is the key of self-surrender. There is a divine power which has thrown this whole cosmos in the Big Bang, formed it of its own power, and that power flows within you, around you. If you can direct even a small stream of that into your whole being, it can wash away, it can mold and liberate the horses waiting within. By a conscious self-surrender, we invite that power, invoke it within us to do what we cannot do far more rapidly. And what is it that we are trying to do in the integral yoga? What distinguishes it from the other yogic systems? While all other yogic systems as they have survived today seek to realize God in a realization that abandons the world because the world is unchangeable, in the integral yoga we seek to realize God in order to manifest the divinity in the world. And here comes the most important resolution of the problem of individual and collective life that we started with. The world itself represents the collective fulfillment of the divine. The world itself is seen as the body of God evolving, awakening to its own divinity, which is hidden, latent, waiting within to manifest. Our individual awakening and divine realization is a step for the world's self-realization. Matter itself as the body of God has to awake to its own divinity. That's the goal of evolution. We saw, remember, it started with hydrogen gas and became all these materials. But all these materials became plant, became animal, became us. And so Sri Aurobindo says, our awakening to self-awareness is in fact the universe awakening itself to self-awareness, looking upon itself. I am nothing but the universe looking upon itself, self-conscious. But the universe cannot become self-conscious in its entirety straight away. So it becomes self-conscious in these points that we are. And here again the individual and collective identity merge in the divine identity. And so the fulfillment of the universe's evolution, its transformation, the body of God revealing its full divinity, is the objective that we work for. Our individual self-realization then completes in the transformation of life itself, not its rejection. And this brings a dimension of difficulty in the yoga. While other yogas withdraw into some divine realization and freedom, we want to realize and manifest that freedom here. And matter is unyielding. It resists. It refuses because it has its terms, its necessity, its compulsions, its demands, which neither life can fulfill nor mind. But the divine power can, because the matter has originated from it. It has the same compulsion that matter has. And that divine power we call the supermind, which is the origin from which the entire Big Bang emanates, and therefore is the master which can compel anything in the Big Bang to yield to it. And so the integral yoga relies on the establishment of the supramental consciousness to overcome the resistance of matter and transform it in order to manifest divinity on earth. That part has also been done for us. As of 1956, you know of that, the supramental consciousness has been established on earth as a force in evolution. Its being here now has changed the entire balance of the game. The yielding of matter is inevitable. The question is how and when and where. It can yield most easily in the matter that is conscious and self-conscious and surrendered to the divine. That's within us. In each one of us is the potential waiting consciously. And so the yoga concentrates on the transformation of our individual nature and its constant expression in collective life. The test of our individual realization is in the collective life. Therefore, we must remain in collective life. We must work for the collective evolution as we work individually. But the collective cannot evolve on its own without the individual evolving. Therefore, for Auroville to succeed and fulfill its ideal, each one of us has to be in a conscious process of evolution. And this networking of individual consciousnesses growing creates the collective awareness awakening and growing. We rest individually and collectively on the strength of the divine force, Divine Mother and her grace. As we invoke each one of us in ourselves individually, there's a collective invocation that rises that works to transform the collective consciousness. And now you can view the whole of Auroville almost like a collective organism evolving through its individuals, creating forms of its life, casting forms, shaping, reshaping forms even as it evolves. And even the external forms of buildings that grow and the cities, arrangements growing is like that, is an expression of that evolution. Nothing though can be effective here in external form unless it's backed by the spirit. Try it in Auroville as an experiment, and I think it's been tried before. Let's pass a decision from the central committee or whatever committee it is. We're going to do this. It won't work. It won't work because that's not what Auroville is meant for. It goes contrary to what Auroville seeks to realize. It will work when we all feel the need for it and collaborate. And the collaboration doesn't mean I go and do it there, but I extend my support in consciousness. Yes, this must be done. And that collective support catches or uses the processes of individuals to give rise to that form that's emerging. And that's the only way we can evolve. Every time we have tried to do it the old way, it has failed. And perhaps in our evolution, it was necessary to experiment with the old ways and realize they don't work, in order to realize that we need to make an effort in a different way. So the whole of the movement of formation of Auroville is a collective sadhana, a collective integral yoga going on, of which each one of us is an individual point of integral yoga. So we understand a huge, in this vast perspective, Auroville as a focal point for the future realization of humanity to be established now in the present by the process of the integral yoga. So this is the broad picture that I wanted to set, and I'll invite your questions now.
I have a question. I would actually like to invite the newcomers first.
Okay. Okay. I'll take the question anyway. I'll weave it into a newcomer's question. Yeah.
My question pertains to the economic rules of Auroville. You have mentioned the psychological rules, the psychological conditions where Mother says be convinced of the essential unity of mankind. Mother said that she didn't want to make in Auroville the same social rules which she made in the ashram. She explained purposely she didn't want to make them. Yet in Auroville she made the same economic rules as in the ashram. And I want to know how you understand them. Are they psychological rules, actually, when she says no private property, no salary, everybody has to work, no circulation of money? How should we see these rules?
Okay. I'll bring it to a point which I implied in passing but did not explicitly state. Auroville itself did not appear out of the blue. It was the result, or its appearance was possible because of work which was already done before in concentration by the integral yoga in the space that is known as the ashram. Because that place or that space established the supramental force, created a condition of concentrated aspiration in a collectivity. Therefore, the next step of its wider expression in human unity was possible as Auroville. But the role of the two is very different, and therefore the two separate institutions. Mother could just as well have said, in Ashram, let's take it one more step and now turn it into an Auroville. You could have. But she didn't. She created a separate space. Why? There are many reasons, but one of the reasons, I'll put it this way, that Auroville cannot fulfill itself unless it has the spiritual base of the integral yoga, which is the task of the ashram to establish first. So without this spiritual core, the Auroville expression cannot exist. But without Auroville, the ashram's work is incomplete, because it's brought to a certain point, but it cannot yet establish it in the collective consciousness of humanity. So there is a natural symbiosis on an inner and outer level. I think there's a comment Mother makes about the difference between the two. She says, the ashram will retain its true role of pioneer, inspirer and guide. Auroville is the attempt towards collective realization. So obviously, there are differences in organization in that collective realization, but all the forms of the collective realization that Mother spoke of, economic, social and otherwise, are the form that human evolution has to take eventually. It's not so much whether it is similar to ashram or different from ashram. It's a question of what is it that will last in human evolution. So let's look at it this way. How will we organize collectively in human evolution eventually if we are to maintain individual freedom? Well, a free coming together, a loose networking of individuals and groups. That's how we will unite the collective and individual need. So, in Auroville, there are free groupings which become communities, and further within that free groupings on economic level, social or artistic or other cultural levels. But a free grouping which has to be a basis. Second, what is the direction in which the economic development will take place? Look at the present tendency of economic development. The capitalist economic system is rapidly ending in a gigantic inequality which becomes its own cause of collapse. There used to be a time in the US which represents the ideal of capitalism, so we take that as an example. There was a time hardly 20 years ago when the richest paid and the poorest paid in a company had a gap of a multiple of 30. Today that multiple is 250. That the CEO is paid 250 times the salary of the lowest. Now that's a clear sign of the breakdown of the economic system itself. A rapid accumulation of power of wealth in a few, and therefore the inability of wealth to circulate, and therefore the collapse of the system. So Sri Aurobindo wrote way back, almost 100 years ago, saying, can't you hear the present economic system leading to its own collapse? Can't you hear the grind and fall of its machinery? So what will be a sustaining system? A sustaining system will be one where there is a shift away from the tokenism of money and its replacement by the truth of value that money represents. And naturally, therefore, the shift from the token to the barter itself, where the value of the object is in the object itself. So such a shift will take place in future as it used to be at one time in the past. In between, there may be transitional arrangements where the token may be there, but we realize its value as a token. So a system where people could be paid, but they are all paid the same amount for the capacity that they express in their work. So one can create such systems. But Mother said, whatever the intermediate system, eventually it will move towards that. Freedom from the token form to a direct expression of the truth. Equally with land. You look back at the past, in India, land was always considered owned by the king, who represented God. In other words, all land is owned by, it's not state, it's God. King only represents God. To the extent that he fails to represent, he can be toppled. And the system was set in such a way. He can allot land according to needs of individuals. And if the land is misused, it could just as well be taken away from the misuse. but it was never owned by an individual ego. And in such an arrangement, nobody could sell land. Even to sell land was considered blasphemous. You're selling your own mother. Earth is your mother, you say. How can you sell your own mother? This whole arrangement of selling land, partitioning of land, ownership of land, etc. came during colonial rule. So eventually, one has to recognize this deeper truth that you cannot sustain collective life where everybody has freedom and equality and inner mutuality unless the ownership of what we possess is also in that mutuality. Mutuality cannot be complete unless it embraces all facets of life. I can't say we are mutual in our aspiration, but don't step into my house, my territory. Well, it's your house if we are one as a family. So the whole of Auroville must be considered our home. And therefore I cannot own this piece versus you owning that piece. Naturally, land itself is drawn into that larger ideal. And in this way, all the forms that she described, you will see, are logical results of the aspiration, the goal we have set, or the process of that goal even. Eventually, all humanity will have to fall back to that way. You will see historically, wherever land's sale was permitted, it has rapidly accumulated into the ownership by a few, and then there were land reforms. The landlords were killed by the peasants who took back the land and cut it up into their own possession. And then again, gradually, it's bought up by a few, again that imbalance, and again toppling of that. So let's break that cycle. Yes.
You were just explaining about the triple action, that is aspiration, rejection, and surrender, which paves the way for our going up. Now, 1/3 of our life goes on sleeping, and 2/3 only we are awake. As for me, going for the aspiration and the method suggested by you, during sleeping hours, I am one with the Almighty. I could feel. Whereas during the waking hours, just like the market volatility, I don't know from where the things come. Sometimes we hear. So how do we go beyond that? I thought what Sri Aurobindo said, you have to find out, go beyond the mind. Is there any way to go beyond the mind to affect these forces?
Yes. Precisely the way to go beyond the mind is what we have discussed. Someone told Mother, how can we transform ourselves into supramental beings? She says, you can't. You can't think yourself into supramentalization. The monkey can't force itself into thought. So what can be done is, the supramental will transform you. By its descent, you can participate. You can open yourself and participate in the process of transformation that it does on you. So by conscious opening to the divine force, it works to change you, and you participate by self-giving and being one with that movement. Okay? So the process of rising above mind is the same. Consciously opening our awareness to the higher force and receiving it. And then actively participating, sometimes even by flowing into it, dissolving oneself in it. So there are specific processes Mother Sri Aurobindo recommends here when he says rising above mind. The center of mental awareness is here. To rise above that. To become conscious of yourself here above the head. Hold yourself in awareness here. He says the first thing that happens is you free yourself from brain fatigue. If you study a lot, work a lot, think a lot, your brain gets tired after a while. But if you shift your awareness to this point, remain here even as you think and work, you'll find your mind never gets tired, or the brain never gets tired. Okay, because you've shifted out from the identification with the physical brain. Here already your mind begins to be free. And then from this point of awareness, you can turn upward. Become conscious of a vast awareness above. Just remain open to that. Invoke it into yourself. You will feel a vastness descending into you. You'll feel a peace descending into you. And in that, automatically, it makes your mind still and quiet. It softens your mind and makes it wide and open. it works on you. But the necessity still exists of you to consciously open and offer yourself, invoking it. And the process itself is very simple, as you can see.
When we were talking about this process of opening, Mother says also about this discovery, self-discovery of the psychic being. And sometimes over there she talks about how to push this door open.
Yes.
You go on pushing it until it opens. So that is an active concentration,
Yes.
an effort involved, and kind of your own self.
Yes. Finding the psychic is essentially a similar process, but Mother also describes how you can push it open. Now, push the door open, the barrier within, but by what will you push? By your ego's will, which then seeks to possess the psychic and absorb it into itself, which the psychic will never yield, and therefore the door won't open. Or by the ego's conscious submission in love and self-surrender, and as a sustained aspiration, no more a push of the will aiming to grab, but giving itself and pushing, however intensely in aspiration but in self-giving, and the door dissolves. So the usage of the word push has created some misunderstanding, but you see the process essentially becomes this self-surrender, offering oneself to the psychic presence within. And then one can let go of the image of the door pushing, because she offers that as one option among several. Rather, she says it is much easier if you go within in a intense concentration, feeling for and seeking for that which the psychic is. And what is it to you? Your deepest aspiration. And how does it express? What do you know it by? By a flaming purity, a flaming peace, joy and love for the Divine Mother. Just be conscious of that within you. And then follow the whole awareness into its source. That's the psychic. So here you do not have anymore the experience of a struggle. Rather you have a concentration dwelling on what you know the psychic to be, as a center of purity and love and aspiration. And offer yourself to that as you go deeper. One can still make the process even simpler by consciously melting your awareness as you come closer to it. Otherwise what happens? You come into its proximity, you don't get to it first. You come into its proximity, its radiance molds you. Next time when you come slightly different. You are more sweet and loving and self-giving in your devotion. And each time you come, you are slightly different. It molds you in its nature until you are closer to its nature, and then it can gently reveal itself. But if from the beginning you make that effort, as you go within, let your awareness itself melt in love, in sweetness, in purity. Softening yourself, dissolving yourself into it. And then you become of its nature, and then it can meet you rapidly. The barrier basically is a barrier of consciousness, which is the difference between what I am and what that is. That's the barrier. So it's not that it is somewhere far inside or there's a hard layer. It's the difference of the two. As you melt to become of its nature, giving yourself to it in love, and it molds you, the barrier dissolves. So essentially again we come back to the same process, a conscious self-surrender, an intense aspiration. And of course, especially with the psychic, the conscious rejection of contrary movements is very important. You will find, even if you have in concentration touched something of the psychic vibration, and you are full of that purity and joy, a movement of anger immediately cuts that connection. And you have to struggle to re-establish it. So necessarily this outer purity, rejecting things which are contrary to the aspiration of the psychic, that becomes very important. Whereas in the vertical ascension, that becomes not so crucial. That thing pours and it prepares you every time. It purifies you naturally. One can even move on both directions simultaneously. At certain times you concentrate to go within. At other times you concentrate to rise above the head. Both are mutually supportive of each other. Yes. Okay. Oh, you have? Patty?
There are two things I wanted to say. One is that that I thought recently that Sri Aurobindo has given us a wonderful formula on the first page of A Life Divine. God, light, freedom, immortality. And that the problem of Americans and perhaps others often is that they put the freedom first and without the God and the light. That is one thing. But another thing I wanted to ask is there was a film last night on the God channel. It was called The Mark of the Beast, and it was about this Armageddon principle. And what I wanted to know is this idea that my main question is, Mother seems to never have mentioned this whole phenomenon in the book of Revelation in the Bible, because they are saying that there's an inevitable thing, that there's going to come a day when some dictator is going to say that there's a mark you have to have in order to do any commerce. And it seems totally contrary to the integral yoga idea. So
Mother makes a reference to many prophecies from various traditions. This is only one of many traditions. You will find every religious tradition looks forward to something, some change, some new age, some heaven on earth. So for example, in Christianity, there is the second coming of Christ. And the second coming is in the hearts of the people. Or in Islam, there is the Imam Mahdi, who will come later and liberate humanity. Or there is in Buddhism, the name given to, I forget the name, but again, the Buddha coming again after so many thousand years, Maitreya, coming as a manifestation of love, and so on. All of them describe a point of crisis and then a breakthrough by a divine intervention into something which is a new divine heaven on earth. So the specific details are irrelevant because they may not always be the way they are described. That's why often these traditions also describe it symbolically. People tend to want to interpret it rigidly, and so the interpretations fail. But if you remain at the level of symbolism, yes, there is even as evolution rises to make a breakthrough, all that belongs to the past rises up to oppose the future. It can take a personified form, it can take a symbolic form, it doesn't matter. There is an opposition that came up. And the opposition has to be defeated by what? By an awakening in people. And until that awakening takes place in a conscious collective aspiration, well, that opposition is going to create its chaos. So that's why I said there's a choice, whether it will be a gradual, painful process or a rapid, joyous process by our participation. So the symbolism applies both ways. There's still a resistance which has to be overcome, but we need not worry about those details. As far as we are concerned, we are not interested in a 1,000-year-old process of gradual evolution. We are here for a rapid, concentrated change. And to the extent that we can grow here in our collective consciousness, the world's circumstances will change. There were many prophecies for massive earthquakes, massive volcanic eruptions, massive destruction of land, collapse of mountains, splitting of mountains, all that in the last 20 years. In 1980, there was a book called We Are the Earthquake Generation, which predicted all these things. Most of them didn't happen. And Mother spoke of this when she was asked, what about these predictions? She said, ever since the supramental consciousness has manifested, most of these things are either changed or cancelled entirely. It's the earth-shaking phenomenon of change of human consciousness. Earthquakes and volcanoes and human evolution that's taking place. It's a psychological breakdown and shift that we are seeing. So the whole interpretation of these things has shifted to a psychological level. The physical details aren't important. Yes.
And with that, I hear that somebody says that many people in Auroville are not here for all this.
So what are they here for? Okay. I don't know if someone claiming that he is here not for Auroville would be always true. It need not always be true. Even if somebody comes and claims, I am not here for Auroville, that's just the outer rebellious nature claiming to be for a different reason. Ask him what he's here for. And he may end up saying something which eventually leads to the same thing that we are all here for. For example, Mother made this observation. There used to be a few people in the ashram who were very critical of the Mother, criticizing her on any occasion given. And someone came to the Mother and said, so-and-so complains about you every time. The Mother said, oh, don't worry. You go and complain to him about me and see how he reacts. So this person went to the other complainant and said, oh, Mother did this today. And the other complainant was very angry. He said, how dare you criticize Mother? You see, there's an internal contradiction. So there are many who have come to Auroville. In the outer form, they may not be conscious of what drew them, but the inner being is conscious. Ask them to leave. They will refuse. They will go through enormous suffering. They will criticize all the circumstances of Auroville, saying, oh, I don't get proper electricity, it's too hot, it's inconvenient, etc. But they won't go. Why? Something within pulls. And one wishes that the inner aspiration took form in the outer. The gap between the outer and inner was bridged. Then they would be conscious of why they are here and could participate actively. That's why the yoga is necessary. But even if there are such people, they represent contradictions in humanity. And it's part of the challenge in Auroville to deal with that kind of problem also.
Then how can the secretary say this person is not for our?
Yes, it's very difficult for someone outside to decide whether you are here for the right reason or not. Only yourself introspecting can decide. And that's why, even in the ashram, Mother used to select people by looking at their inner being. And after that, we don't have such a system anymore. So we just say, well, whoever fits our basic criteria comes and works, stays on probation. If they are not suited for Auroville, they will go on their own. That's the approach we have taken in the ashram and pretty much in Auroville also. We give a chance to everybody, assuming a basic framework. And that framework is what Mother has described. But do you believe that there's something common uniting us? Yes, fine. And it has happened. You have seen people who have tried to stay, they can't. There are even people who have come claiming to be for the ideal of Auroville but couldn't stay. Because something within, or the part which was aligned to the ideal was too small and the rest was not. And they couldn't, maybe they go back, have a preparation and then come back again when they are ready. So we take it as part of an evolutionary difficulty. Rather than saying X or Y is or is not, we say everybody has a part that is aligned and some parts which are opposing. And yet straight away we cut through all these divisions. We all have this problem. Some part within me is not yet aligned. And the whole yoga is to integrate the whole of me into my aspiration. Yes.
In the same way, there are some people who have come in here over the years who prove that they're here for material gain, that they haven't just simply have stolen what ought to be Auroville's. They are so, in other words, there are humans who are so thick or not ready for this manifestation you're talking about. There's something that Auroville doesn't give them, and they still do what seem to be really terrible things.
Yes. There are actually people who have, being here, caused harm to the ideal that Auroville represents. In such cases, it is better to have these people sent away, if such a mechanism can be developed. But the criteria will be very simple. Only somebody who is seen to consistently harm, even after being given a warning or two, then it is better the person is asked to leave. And generally what will happen, they will themselves at some point find that they are out of tune with the consciousness and feel very insecure or unstable being here and will leave on their own. We have had examples like that even in the ashram. A deliberate revolt against what the ideal of Auroville stands for, then you have no place, obviously. But that's taken care of by the criteria that Mother has described. Yes.
Coming to Auroville as a guest, it's a very joyful and and even you experience many insight and experience, and it's a lot of enthusiasm. All the social setup in Auroville gives you super feedback, and you feel really overwhelmed. And it's a completely different experience to join it.
Yes.
And to start the newcomer process, suddenly even you meet the same people, you do the same things, the same activities, the experience is totally different.
Yes. That's a very important experience all of us will face. When we first come, the reason why we came is because our aspiration drew us. And so that aspect of the contact with the aspiration and with the divine, with the psychic, however indirectly, is at the forefront. And as a result, everything we do, see and meet is beautiful. When we settle here for good, then we tend to slide back into our normal way of living, in which the aspiration is secondary. And the rest of our habits comes forward. And then everything we do suddenly becomes painful, difficult, grey, meaningless. The only correction one can bring in is bring back the aspiration to the front. That also is made difficult because every time I meet X, the same problems recur. And the sensitivity of my emotions shrinks from those problems. I feel hurt, I withdraw into myself, etc. There is only one way still, to persist in bringing forward not the sensitivity of the emotions, but the deeper truth of the psychic or the spiritual consciousness. Here, one can take up several processes which will help. One of which Sri Aurobindo emphasizes in the Integral Yoga, is to begin to see consciously and to feel the presence of the divine in all things. Initially, you start with the plants and the flowers, beautiful things which are happy. Gaze upon them and try to become conscious of the divine presence in them, because the divine presence exists in all things. And then later you can extend it to others, people including buildings, earth. As you can develop this awakening of awareness, even when you deal with problems, you will begin to perceive that behind the problems, behind the people creating the problems, there is still the divine presence inhabiting behind or within. You will relate to the divine presence, and that immediately softens the impact of the difficulty. It gives you the strength to deal with the difficulty. You can even take a position where you perceive in the difficulty, the pressure itself, a challenge thrown to you by the divine to draw out some greater potential within which will conquer that difficulty. But that can come later. For now, just this awareness of the divine. When dealing with an extreme situation, somebody who I just can't stand, or a situation I just can't stand, bring consciously the divine presence in between. Visualize the Divine Mother, invoke her in whatever form in between as a screen. And immediately you will find the impact of pain or difficulty is dissolved. Then, unaffected or less affected by the difficulty, you can act as necessary. But this will be a problem we will have to face, because the yoga must take up all the parts of our being. And in order to take them up, those parts are given a chance to come forward. Rather, life itself draws out all the parts which are not yet aligned to my aspiration. And the very fact that they come up, you can see it as an occasion to bring them into the aspiration. So here's the difficulty I face. I meet X, and X is always abusive. What can I do about it? Well, I could change the work, but I can't right now. Circumstances have forced me into it. So I can consciously awaken my aspiration with a certain intensity. It doesn't matter if X is abusive or not. I am here for the divine. I will relate to X by becoming conscious that within him also there is this spark of divinity which has called him here. And whatever is abusiveness, I will deal with him then accordingly. And maybe then I will find the strength to tell him, look, please don't be abusive, it hurts me. You're such a fine person otherwise. You draw out that beautiful part within and say, I can't stand it. I want to be friends with you, but this is coming in the way. Please try. And perhaps because you've approached with that love, with that awareness of the common unifying factor within us, his whole attitude changes immediately. See, the practical error we make is that we think by doing the right thing, things will fall into place. The solution is not the right thing, but the right state. When we approach the same thing with the right consciousness, aligned to the common unifying factor, evoking that in the situation, then the situation changes entirely. So Mother says this that often when we try to align ourselves to be a willing servitor of the divine consciousness, when we ask the divine, what is it that's the right thing I should do? She says often the right thing is not an action but a state. It doesn't matter what you do, if you act in that state, the situation changes. So often even in the discussions, people have tried to rationally sort out problems. And logic may be perfect, but it doesn't solve the problem. Rather, if they approach it in the right state, then often the logic is flawed, but things just work. So this will have to be our constant recourse. Find that basis of that deeper unity, evoke that in the interactions. There is no other way lasting. Yes.
I'm not very clear about the mother's instruction in the people yoga about somewhere rejecting sex.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that
Yes.
you take attachment to sex, but isn't it a natural form of life energy? And there are a lot of New Age theories which believe this to be a kind of symbolic representation of a deeper unity.
Okay. See, one of the differences between the ashram and Auroville is that in the ashram there is a complete prohibition of sex and celibacy is the norm. In Auroville, families with normal family relationships are allowed to exist because it's a township, it's not an ashram. But this raises a conflict in many, because in a lot of the literature you will find Sri Aurobindo and the Mother describing how to overcome the problem of sex and how it degrades the spiritual experience. For Auroville, I don't know if Mother has given any active guideline, but generally, since Auroville is not, or Aurovillians are not intended to be in a state of intense yoga, this condition of celibacy as in the ashram does not apply. Nevertheless, the principle applies, and the principle is this. We do not consider sex as anything bad in itself, morally or ethically, etc. But rather we view it as a process that still represents an instinctive life. The sexual instinct is an instinct, it's not a rational thing. It's not by itself even an emotional expression. It can be aligned to an emotion, but by itself the sexual instinct is a biological instinct. And it's an instinct. It pops up at a certain age as teenagers. It vanishes after a certain while for some it doesn't. But it doesn't exist in children before that age. Where did it pop up from? It's just an instinct. So by itself, recognize sex is an instinct. And it represents a remnant of the animal life. Associated with it may be emotions, ideals, ideas, which can be beautiful in themselves. But they can exist without the sexual instinct also. As in family life, you can be in a romantic relationship without the sexual element. For example, you can be in very deep emotional communion without sex. So that vibration of the instinct is associated with a chaotic movement also. Yes, it can be. Now here the distinction I'm making is this, that there is a chaotic movement associated with the sex instinct, which is contrary to the spiritual consciousness. So in the ashram, where the whole goal was to establish the supramental consciousness, without that prohibition, we would not have succeeded in the very first objective of the ashram. But now, in Auroville, since that compulsion is not there, you may still view the coarseness of the vibration of the instinct as contrary to the psychic awakening, contrary to a deeper harmony on a spiritual level, and to that extent, it can be a problem. It's possible also that there is a state of deep emotional communion which may flow into a sexual expression because of association. Because of association, past association. There's no other reason why it should become sexual. You see? It may flow. And in that case, the sexual expression does not have the same coarseness or chaos. Though it tends eventually. You forget the emotion, you slide into it eventually. That also happens. So in the past, there were systems, as in the left-hand path of Tantra, which sought to raise all activities of life into their highest or deepest symbolic expression, including looking upon sex as the coming together of the Purusha and Prakriti, as a symbol, and then to practice it with that symbolism. But the whole basis of that was that you put yourself in the state of that symbolism. You have to become consciously aligned to the divine presence within you. So even in the left-hand path, there were rituals of purification before that Maithuna, the union, could take place, without which it's just coarse sex, it has no other value. Even within that path, there are 3 gradations of its expression: Tamasic, Rajasic and Sattvic. And the coarsest is the sexual expression. The refinement is the self-realization. The outer nature merging into the self within. And the same symbolism of Maithuna is used through these 3 levels. So they said for the gross man who lives only in the senses, well, he uses the biological process, but the objective is to free himself from that and to rise into self-realization. But because the symbolism is the same, people have misused or misunderstood or used it as an excuse for simple justification of desire. Now let's set aside the whole issue of sex and its vibration, rather deal with it now from a purely yogic point of view. Here's an instinct very coarse, close to in vibration to anger, coarse desires, jealousies. In vibrational terms, it's the same category. Since we seek to free ourselves from all such coarse expressions of the lower vital, purifying the lower vital to become an instrument for expressing a divine play rather than coarse pulls and pushes of energies, which are based on the ego. Sex also comes as part of that purification. Okay? So to be free of the coarseness of the sexual desire, but one may still express a sweetness of expression, but then you do not feel anymore the need for sex in the relationship. It tends to fade out. It's not important anymore. We will end up with that. And yet the relationship will be more true and more beautiful because the coarser element is gone. So one can view it in that way. To each according to his level of current development. We can then end with just a quick summary, and then we can chant Om together. We started with the larger evolutionary movement, which has brought humanity to a crisis point, where the problem has to be resolved or we destroy ourselves. The resolution is offered on the basis of a deeper unity, which alone can harmonize individual freedom and its unique needs and the collectiveness and its larger, deeper truth, for which Auroville is established, the conscious practice of yoga being essential to the fulfillment of Auroville's goal. it's essential for each one of us to begin to make a small change in our lives individually. The responsibility rests with each individually. We cannot say that I will wait for others, or others are not doing. I have to start. The process is also given to us. With it, there is a tremendous power that has been established in the space that Auroville represents. You can walk into that space and you can feel it, you step out of it and you feel the difference. The focal point of that power materially is the Matrimandir. To consciously look upon Matrimandir as symbolic of that power, to respect it for what it is, even to view it as the physical representation of the ideal that we seek, to spend some time there in conscious concentration, to discover that basis on which we will establish our larger unity, is essential for each one of us. It's not a ritual, it's not a religious expression, rather it's a symbolic expression of a deep truth. That's why Mother said, build the Matrimandir, the sooner it is finished, the better it is for all. Because it's a symbol of that. In Matrimandir itself, Mother has established a tremendous power that is increasing day by day. She had once said, build the Matrimandir and I take it upon myself to make it one of the most powerful centers, spiritual centers on earth. And she has done that, and it's growing. To take advantage of that, to rely on its strength, on her force, on the strength of the ideal itself to actualize itself, and to consciously align ourselves to it. This is essential for each one of us, without which we cannot fulfill the purpose for which we have come to Auroville. So now when we chant Om together, again 5 times, we can align ourselves in our aspiration individually, and all our individual aspirations uniting collectively in the resonance of the chant as it rises like a flame, invoking the divine presence in our hearts, in our lives, and in the community that we represent, and in the world. Om.